Hi class, so I'm creating a review video for your exam one, but before I get into the actual content, I wanted to make sure that you do know how to download the Respondus Lockdown browser. It's a policy that my department has that when you're taking your chapter exams that you are utilizing the Respondus software. So for you, this is the South Texas College website. You can go ahead and click on Blackboard, and there might be other ways that you can find it, but this is the way that I have been able to find it. So once I get into Blackboard, I'm already signed in. If you are not signed in, then you would need to sign in. And then let me go ahead and close these pop-ups. So here on the left-hand side, if I wanted to go to the class, I click on course, but for the Respondus Lockdown browser, it's here on my STC. You click it, and that's the website that shows up here. And then what you're going to do is you're going to scroll down. And again, yours might look a little bit different from mine just because this is the instructor view. But I have here, it says Respondus software. Click here to download. And it gives you, I guess, some more instructions if you're having some issues. But also if I keep scrolling, right here it says online course support, and then here, download lockdown browser. So either one, whichever one that you find is fine. And so then here, this is where you would select the version that you need. So because I am working on a Mac, I have the Mac one, but there's different versions. There's one for a Chromebook. I think if you have an iPad, there is an app that you can download on, I guess, I can't even remember what it's called, but wherever you download apps, there is one that is for Respondus. And then a Windows one, and then you just go ahead and click install. So once you install it, you're gonna have it's like another web browser. So it's like you're using Google Chrome or like you're using Safari. It's another web browser. And so once you have it, you see it on your desktop, you click on it, and then from there, you go to southtexascollege.edu, log into your Blackboard, and then that's how you are able to open the exam. Because let's go into student view, right? So as if you were viewing it as a student. So you would need to, again, once you are in the Respondus browser, it's like a normal web browser. Then you're going to click on course content, same thing, go to week 1, and then there you'll find the exam. And that's it. That's how you get the Respondus browser. But let's go ahead and move on to the actual content for the review. Exam 1 is chapters 1, 2, and 3. So let's go ahead and get started with chapter 1. So for chapter 1, this is kind of a summary of everything for the whole entire textbook. So just kind of keep that in mind. So it is probably the most information will come from chapter 1 just because it's kind of a big synopsis. But so we'll start off with that life, it's diverse, and that different organisms kind of share characteristics. They could either be broad or specific. So here in these pictures I have bacteria, a human, a plant, and fungi. And so some of these share a lot of traits, such as, that they all have genetic material, they're all living, but they are also diverse, right? The most complex one would be a human, and probably the least complex would be bacteria. So just kind of keep that in mind that you might not see yourself as related to bacteria, and no, you're not closely related, but you do share some traits with bacteria. When we are organizing, or we have kind of like a system for organization, and so the smallest unit of life is a cell. That is the smallest unit. So don't confuse that with an atom. That's a common mistake, is that an atom is the smallest living thing. No, so an atom is the smallest, I think, matter. But as far as living, the smallest living thing is a cell, and then it builds from there. It goes from cell to tissue, organ system, organism, and then it can keep going right until the biosphere. But I do need you to remember this: cell, tissue, organ system, organism. and then it keeps going. So I do really need you to practice this because you will have a question on your exam as far as the levels of organization and putting them in order. So some of the things that life needs basically to exist, one of the biggest things and one of the distinguishing factors for something to be considered living is that it is able to metabolize, so that it is able to convert energy. Like for you as a human, you have to convert energy from your food. So you have to eat food, and then that food is then converted into usable energy that we call ATP. So you are able to metabolize, you are living. One that is not living, a good example is a virus. So viruses are not considered to be living. Even though they have a lot of traits of cells, they're not living because they cannot metabolize. They are not able to make ATP. And so it's because of that distinguishing feature that viruses are not considered to be living. As far as where we get our energy from, all of our energy does come from the sun, and then it kind of goes down into different categories, but all of our energy does come from the sun. And then you may know that plants are able to do this. Some bacteria also can do this, but photosynthesis, they can photosynthesize, they can take the energy from the sun in the form of photons, which is light energy. So they take solar energy and then they're able to convert that into something else. So for example, plants, they take the solar energy and they're able to make a sugar, which is glucose. It's amazing. And then from there, humans can eat plants, or other animals can eat plants, and then the energy is transferred over. But as far as where it comes from, all of the energy does come from the sun. It's very interesting. And here they kind of talk about the chemical flow between organisms. And so that really takes you into this, right? All of our energy comes initially from the sun, and then it goes to producers, which would be our plants. Consumers could be humans or a rabbit. And then it can kind of go elsewhere. So then he can eat the rabbit. And then once it dies, you have decomposers. Here they have an example of a mushroom. Those look like maggots, or I'm not actually so sure. But so all that you're seeing here is a transfer of energy. So energy is just being transferred through levels. Another distinguishing factor of things that are living is that they are able to reproduce. And I have a picture of a family here from the textbook. And so they do not make a copy. For humans, they undergo sexual reproduction and use meiosis, right? And so you can get traits from your parents. You're not making like an identical copy. But just know that organisms are able to reproduce. And here actually I should emphasize this is about DNA. That DNA is the blueprint. So all that DNA is, it's just a set of instructions. It's not, DNA is not living, it doesn't do anything, it's just a blueprint, it's just instructions to make things. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next, I think chapter 3, so give me 1 second. Organisms are able to adapt, let's see if they have any simple ones. Right, let's see, some hawks catch fish, others are better at catching rabbits. So adaptations for flight and catching prey. Humans who live at extreme elevations exhibit an adaptation that reduces the amount of hemoglobin in the blood. So if you live somewhere in high elevation, you're going to have less oxygen, and so that's probably why they're talking about this. Hemoglobin is it deals with the oxygen in your blood. Okay. For evolution, I need to, well, let's see, does it go more into the domains later? I want to say yes. Okay, so I don't say things over and over again. But for evolution, we start here, right? The first ancestral cell, which by the way was in the ocean. And then from there you kind of branch out into different ones. So our first type of cell, it was very small. It did have genetic material, and then you start to have mutations. And if you have enough mutations, or enough mutations that really decipher it from something else, then you can get a new species. And then it just kind of keeps building. So what you have here is just a product of lots and lots of mutations. And so mutations are random, and sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're neutral. But just know that what we have here is a product of mutations. And it's really interesting how you can kind of see this progression of something so complex as an animal like a human or a bird that came from a small ancestral cell. So really interesting. And all of this happens through selective pressures and mutations. And that kind of gives us this, right? It says here, explains the unity and diversity of life. I need to emphasize natural selection and evolution, just that they are different. They're not the same. Natural selection is something that happens, it could happen in a shorter amount of time, like let's say 40 years, versus evolution, right? Like this is evolution. Going from an animal that came from bacteria cell, this took millions or billions of years. Actually, it says it here, right? Billions of years, starting from 0.5 to 4 billion years. So very interesting how much time actually goes by it. And for us, it's kind of hard to grasp because we're here for such a short amount of time. But know that natural selection is short term and evolution is a long-term, millions of years, billions of years. You will not see evolution in your lifetime. So something that I really just needed to reiterate into you. For natural selection, a really common person, like his name always comes up because he is kind of like the one that coined the term natural selection is Charles Darwin. So Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace both independently came to the conclusion that evolution occurs by a process called natural selection. So natural selection does fuel evolution. So you must have natural selection occur first before you can have evolution. And this too, environments may change due to the influence of living or non-living factors. Non-living factors are going to be things like climate, soil type, water, things like that. And then this we kind of already went over a little bit. Let's see. This is a good one that we should talk about. So individuals that are better suited to a new environment tend to live longer and they produce more offspring. And then let's see this last one. Adaptations result in higher reproductive success, increase in frequency. Okay, so this is kind of saying if you have good genes, that you will see those genes more frequent for, it could be in a population or just in future generations to come. So good genes typically are passed on. Here's a really good example of natural selection. Because this could have happened in a short amount of time as far as, well, actually, no, this is not a natural selection diagram. This is more of an evolution one. I was hoping to see the natural selection of Darwin's finches. So, I mean, it kind of is, and I don't like that this is kind of cut off, but okay. So it says natural selection and evolutionary processes. The process of evolution can be summed up with descent with modification. So I have a evolutionary tree and then I have all these different birds and that they all came from either one bird or two birds. They don't have one at the bottom, but how they all kind of branch off. And so they branch off because they have different needs. That might be that they live in a different area. So for example, a bird that has a long beak like this, super, super small. So that means that this guy is either he eats like really small insects or he eats like really small seeds. Same with someone over here, like these have a really big beak. So these animals eat something that's much larger. It could be really large seeds. Typically that's what it is, really, really big seeds. And so these might live very close together as far as like habitat, but they are able to survive because they eat different things. If we live in the same area but we eat different things, we're able to coexist. So that's what that diagram is showing you. Another way of classification is what we call taxonomy. So we, and this might be a little bit more familiar to you slightly. like when we classify animals, we classify them using taxonomy. So, like that, there are birds, there are snakes, there are fish, right? That's how we organize things. And so, but if you were to go into the scientific way of organizing, we have their like their scientific name. So, for example, a wolf has a scientific name which is Canis lupus. And so Canis lupus is the genus. Canis is the genus and species is lupus. Canis lupus. Homo sapien. Homo genus, sapien species. And this is the kind of the categories. And so these I also need you to practice. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I had taught some PSJ students, and they said that when they were, I think in middle school, that their teacher had taught them the Dr. King Philip came over for good soup. So if you can come up with some sort of pneumatic, that might be easier. That's how I remember, honestly. So Dr. King Philip came over for good soup. So domain would be the most broad and species is the most specific. So practice this because this will be on your exam. The three domains, which from the previous slide are going to be up here. So this is the most broad. The three domains for all of life are archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. You as a human, you are a eukaryotic organism. You have a nucleus, and that's the distinguishing factor, is that there are nuclei in all of your cells. And so that would put you in this domain, that you are eukarya. These two, the archaea and bacteria, are both prokaryotic. So both of them, their cells do not have a nucleus. And so the distinguishing features between this, if for archaea, they are, well, actually, these are the same. But let's see, they may be representative of the first cells on Earth. So the first ever types of cells, these would be like ancient types of cells, but still prokaryotic, still no nucleus. For these bacteria, they're found almost everywhere, right? And so those are the distinguishing factors between these, because both of these are prokaryotic. And we're not going to learn about cells yet. That will be in a future chapter. So don't worry about the nitty gritty, but just kind of remember these three: archaea, bacteria, eukarya, and why they're different. There's a great diagram here that kind of shows you a little bit of the differences between the kingdoms. So we had spoken about eukarya, right? The domains and the kingdoms, excuse me. I have the three domains here. I have 1 archaea, 2 bacteria, and then these are all eukarya, the third domain. So 3 domains. All of eukarya are eukaryotic. Bacteria and archaea are prokaryotic. So very interesting. Really briefly, we talked about binomial names, and like I gave you the example of the wolf. So that's what we consider binomial, that it has 2 parts, the genus and the species. So when you're talking about binomial names, it just means genus and species. Homo sapien, let's see which one they have here, the Pisum sativum or garden pea. Genus and species, or here they have it called as the epithet. This is relatively easy. You all have seen this ever since elementary school, the scientific method. This is something that we use universally through science. And so it really starts with an observation. So if we're going to talk about like Charles Darwin, he is the person that he went to the Galapagos Islands and he saw all of the birds, all of the tortoises and everything and everything. And he was there for a long time. I think I had read that he was there like 30 years or 40 years. So he was there for a long time. And so when he developed the natural selection concept, all that it started with was observations, right? So the beginning of the scientific method is an observation. So for Charles Darwin, he went to the Galapagos Islands and he was just looking at everything. He was looking at the different plant life, looking at the different birds, the different whatever else was there, maybe snakes, bats. I'm sure there's tons of stuff. And so he was observing, and through those observations, he started to question things, right? Why is it that all the birds are able to live together, but they look different? Why do some birds have big beaks? Why do some have small beaks? And so you kind of develop all of these questions, and it's from those questions that you have a hypothesis, right? And so for a hypothesis, we formulate it in a if this, then that format. Once you formulate a hypothesis, then you create your experiment, you analyze your data, and you create a conclusion. And then here I have control group. When you are developing an experiment, it's important that you include a control group because you use that for comparison. So a control group is a group that doesn't receive the treatment, and then you use it for comparison. So a really good example they have in the next slide is that they have this group of people, and it says here that they're going to give them an antibiotic to treat ulcers. And so when they're doing the experiment, it says the groups were treated the same, except as noted that some of them got a control, that they got a placebo. So a placebo is a pill that has, it doesn't have the treatment in it. So they kind of got a pill that does nothing, basically. And then another group got a pill that had antibiotic A, and then one that got antibiotic B. So this is important because when you're going to compare the results, you're able to see, or when you are looking at the results, you're able to compare them. And so one important thing is that you wouldn't tell these people which one they're getting. You wouldn't tell them that they're getting the placebo or A or B. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, that was chapter 1. Chapter 2 and 3 are going to be much shorter, so just bear with me. So let's go ahead and go into chapter 2, chemical basis of life. And we start off with where the actual elements come from. And so it's kind of interesting. When I was reading this, I wanted to include it just so that you kind of knew. It says, look, the majority of heavier elements such as iron are produced when stars explode as a supernova. Supernovas scatter heavier elements into space, which then become parts of planets. And this is just kind of like a fun fact. The iron in blood was formed from explosion of stars. So wanted to throw that in there just in case you were kind of curious, because I thought that was very interesting. Okay, so on the smallest level, right, the atom is the smallest type of matter, and that makes everything that we have. And so for the atomic structure theory states that elements consist of atoms. And so I should emphasize this. When we're talking about a theory in science, a theory is something that is proven, right? Just like gravity, the theory of gravity, that is true, right? If you drop something, it's going to fall. So whenever you see this word theory, just know that that is true. As far as when you see it in science. If you see it in another curriculum, it might be different, but as far as science, theory is considered to be proven. It's been tested over and over and over, and is considered to be almost like as you would see it as a fact. It's true, it's proven, it's factual. And so let's move on to here, subatomic elements. This is probably super fresh on your memory. We have 3 types: neutrons, protons, and electrons. Neutrons are neutral. They have no electrical charge found in the nucleus. For protons, they're positive, found in the nucleus, and electrons are negative, found outside of the nucleus, moving in orbitals. Types of chemical bonds, you can have a molecule. So like they have 4 examples here. So this one, O2, that's oxygen. And so this is a molecule. This is another molecule. This is another molecule. So these 4 are different molecules. You might know that one, right? H2O, that one's water. And so a compound contains molecule containing atoms of more than one element. So these have 2 different elements, right? I have an H and an O, so those are different. And same thing here. C, H, and O, those are all different. And so this would be considered a compound. Oh, wrong. Went to the wrong. Okay. The two types of bonds, and these for sure will be on your exam, that's why I have them highlighted for you, are ionic and covalent. Ionic is the attraction between opposite charges, and covalent sharing electrons to complete an outer shell. And so as you're watching this, I would hope that you're taking just like a few notes, and then after you're done watching, you can go ahead and review, and then I would take the exam. So when we're looking at a chemical formula, down here I have a formula, taking in CO2, water, and you're making glucose and oxygen. If you weren't already familiar, this is the formula for photosynthesis. The only thing that's missing is that this does need sunlight. But so when you're looking at this entire formula, there's two parts to it. You have what we call the reactants. So the reactants, it says here, molecules that participate in reactions, shown to the left of the arrow. So these both right here, CO2 and water, these are the reactants, and then we call this little arrow yield. So reactants yield these two products. So these two products are glucose and oxygen. So just remember the two different types, or two different parts of the formula, the reactants and the products. Let's move on to water. Water is basically why we have why our Earth is the way it is, why we have life. It all revolves around water, and so that's why when we're studying different planets, they're always looking for water, because without water we wouldn't exist. And so water has some really unique properties. Here's the structure of water. You have the two H's and the O, and so what's super unique about water is it's slightly negative and slightly positive. And because it is slightly negative and slightly positive, it can attract different things. It can attract, like on this side that's slightly negative, it can attract a positive. On this side that's slightly positive, it can attract a negative. And so that's very unique, and so that's why our Earth is the way it is. And so some of the things about it that I wanted to include is that life began in water. It did start in the ocean. It's the single most important molecule on Earth. It has unique properties that make it life-supporting, and properties stem from the structure of the molecule. So some of the properties are that it's a universal solvent. A lot of things can mix into water, like sugar. You can put sugar in water and mix it, and it's completely fine. Cohesion and adhesion. So here I have a picture of these bugs that they're able to walk on water, and that's because of this property, cohesion and adhesion. As well as this one too, the high surface tension. So like here, when again, like that, we're looking at this, that they're able to step on water and not really completely submerge, because the water molecules are holding onto each other. That's why if you were to, maybe when you were a child, if you ever did this, I would do this as a kid, like you can drop two water droplets apart from each other but close to each other. So if you were to put two droplets close to each other, they adhere and make one big water droplet. And so that's a cohesion adhesion property, as well as surface tension. When you touch that water droplet, that it's able to kind of move. That's really, it's very interesting that the water it moves kind of like a small little bubble. Another one is that it has high heat capacity, high heat of vaporization, varying densities. So for high heat, this is that water is able to stay hot for a long time. So like here they have a picture of water boiling. So water takes a long time to boil just because it takes a lot of energy, but once it does boil, it's able to stay hot for a long time. I mean, not forever, but it is for a long time. Like you can make coffee, and coffee can stay hot for, I mean, several minutes. And this is a good property and bad. Like if we're talking about climate change, is bad, right? If water is able to stay hot for a long time, if it's really hot on the surface of the planet, that means that the water will also get hot. And so animals that live there, or plant life or bacteria, are used to having a specific like temperature to live. And if this kind of goes above the threshold, then those things, they die. For example, coral reefs can only live within a certain temperature range. Once it gets too hot, they die. And so if you ever were to look up coral bleaching, you'll see that, and it's actually really, really sad when we're losing our coral reefs at a fast rate. So, but yes, wanted to bring that in. Also, density. Ice floats, and ice is water. Like, can you think of anything else that has that property? That it's the same thing. Like water and ice are the same, but they physically are in a different form, right? And so, ice is able to, because it's less dense, is able to float, right? And so that's kind of very, very interesting. Okay, if we're talking about pH, we start here with 0, go all the way up to 14. Anything between 0 and 7, right, less than 7 basically, is going to be very acidic. Something that is at 7 is neutral, for example, water. And anything above 7 to 14 is what we call basic. And then they have the examples for you to kind of look at. But just remember that pH of 7 is neutral. And then we're going to move on really quickly to Chapter 3, the organic molecules of life, and then we will be done. Just have a few slides and then be almost done. So there are 4 categories for biological molecules. We also call these biomolecules. We call them macromolecules. Those are the same concepts. So if you see those different words, just know that it's the same thing. But the 4 are going to be carbs, known as carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And then I'll show you examples of each of them. And so for you as a human, other organisms do this too, but this is kind of easier for you to remember. For digestion breaks these molecules into subunits to build the macromolecules that build up your body. And so once you eat food, your body is able to break down that food and transfer it into usable energy that could then make other things. Let's go into carbs. These are the most common carbs that we know, and I added up here that carbs are a short-term energy. So like if you eat bread or corn, short-term would be that you have energy, that day, right? Or maybe even the next day. But things that are really starchy, and also, I wish they had examples of like fruits. Fruits would also be a really good short-term type of energy. Oranges, apples, anything like that. And then these are going to be these are starches, or more starchy: bread, potatoes, rice, corn, pasta. When we talk about carbs, there are different kind of like levels. You have a monosaccharide, disaccharide, and polysaccharide. Monosaccharide just means that it's a single carb, right? It's just one unit. Disaccharide, when you see di, that means 2. So I have 2 monosaccharides that are chained together. So because there's 2 and they are linked together, we call it a disaccharide. And then a polysaccharide would be that I have multiple monosaccharides, here I have 4, and that they're all linked together. One that they really want me to emphasize, and it will be on your exam, is a polysaccharide known as cellulose. And cellulose is found in the plant cell wall. It's extremely fibery, and so that's why plants are very strong. If you were like, for that celery, if you've ever broken celery in half, you're still going to see all of the fibers. Same thing with mango. If you eat mango, it's super, super fibery. So things, other things too could be like wood. Wood is super fibery, and cotton. Those things all have cellulose. So cellulose is very, very fibrous, and it is found in the plant cell wall. It's an example of a polysaccharide. For lipids, these are some common lipids. So we associate lipids with fats, with waxes, with oils. So here they have cheese, ice cream, lard, butter, and oil. This is a type of energy that would be long-term. So this is also detrimental kind of to us, because we tend to gravitate towards these foods. And so what's interesting is that like you as a human, we didn't have, when we developed as a species, we didn't have just this like excess amount of food everywhere. We would have to forage for our food. little by little. And so you're kind of eating all day, eating berries or potatoes, whatever it is that you found as a species. It wasn't like we didn't have grocery stores where there's just food everywhere. And so you naturally gravitate towards foods that have a lot of energy. And so now that we can just have this food all the time, that's why we tend to kind of gain weight, because they have a lot of energy. And so your body is always trying to store that energy in the form of fat. So when you eat these things, your body takes it, stores it as fat. And so then that's how we kind of gain weight. So very interesting how that, interesting and kind of detrimental how that works. But so inside of a cell, we have a cell right here. There are lipids inside of the cell. And so in this example, they want to show you the plasma membrane. So this right here is the plasma membrane, and this is right here. This is going to be the border of the cell, and it's made out of lipids. The type of lipid is a phospholipid. So this is a huge phospholipid. And so do you see that there's like, I don't know, I can't think of a number, maybe 50 here, 50. So there's like thousands, millions of phospholipids. And they line up in a phospholipid bilayer because there's one layer here, one layer here. I have the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell. And so what's unique about phospholipids is that they have a hydrophilic and hydrophobic part. Hydrophobic means that it is scared of water or water hating, and then hydrophilic is water loving, it's okay with water. And so that's why the heads are oriented in this way. So the heads are in the inside of the cell or on the outside of the cell because that's where you are going to find water. And then the hydrophobic tails are here in the middle. They don't like water. And so this is the hydrophobic part, and then right here, hydrophilic, hydrophilic. And so again, here it says, it doesn't say hydrophilic, it says nonpolar. And so I wonder if I had it in another slide. I might have, and I might have missed it. When we're talking about polar, what polar means is that it's okay with water. So if it's polar, it's okay with water. If it's non-polar, it is not okay with water, and we can consider it to be hydrophilic. So non-polar does not like water. Excuse me. Okay, so for proteins, these are different proteins or types of foods that are rich in proteins. This is and I want to emphasize that this is not saying that these foods don't have carbs, they don't have lipids, they definitely do. It's just that these foods have more protein than the other molecules than they have of carbs or et cetera, et cetera. So these like for beans have a lot of protein, but they also can have depending on the bean, like this one, the nuts. This is actually a great example. So nuts have a lot of protein, yes, but they also have a lot of lipids. They have a lot of fat. So I just want to reiterate that. But these do have a lot of protein, tofu. I don't like that they have just raw meat just here. That's kind of off-putting. But they have meat, tofu, which tofu, if you didn't know, is just comes from soybeans. So this is kind of like a soybean in a compressed form. Nuts, beans, eggs, and milk. Eggs, I'm not so sure that they have a lot of protein. Same with milk. I know eggs have a lot of cholesterol, and so that's why they only recommend that you eat, I think, like one egg a day, and even at that, it's too much cholesterol. Milk, kind of the same thing. There's a lot of studies coming out about milk and how it's kind of linked to breast cancers because of all the hormones in it. But yeah, very interesting. So just kind of keep that in mind. But yes, those are proteins, or forms of proteins in food. And so their function is to, for one, support inside of your body, metabolism, transport, defense, regulation, and also motion. So some of the more important things about proteins is what a protein is made out of. And so there are 20 different what we call amino acids, and it's those combinations of amino acids that can make a protein. So for example, when we're talking about the foods, these have different amino acids, and so you cannot get your 20 essential amino acids from just eating like one type of protein. You have to have different types of proteins to have a what we call a complete protein. But yes, moving on, this is the last one as far as the 4 types of biomolecules, the nucleic acids. And so this is just that your food has genetic material. Your food either has DNA or RNA. And then we're going to go more specifically into what makes up DNA. So I have a DNA molecule here, or DNA structure, and it has 2 strands. And so what's unique about DNA is that it has these what we call nitrogenous bases. And so maybe you remember A, T, G, and C. Those are 4 different nitrogenous bases. And so if you kind of look at the way they're aligned between this G, which is guanine, and cytosine, do you see how there are 3 bonds here? And between the thymine and the adenine, there are 2. So because there are different fluctuations, right, 3 bonds, 2 bonds, 3 bonds, 2 bonds, that's why DNA has that unique structure. It's because of the alignment of those, and it's very interesting. So for DNA has the 4 nitrogenous bases, adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, and RNA does not have the same 4. It has adenine, guanine, uracil, and cytosine. So instead of the thymine, it has what we call uracil. So uracil is a nitrogenous base that is only found in RNA. And that's it, guys. That is the end of the review session. So again, make sure that you took notes, you review, and then after you review, you go ahead and take your exam, and I really feel that you will be successful. If you have any questions, let me know, and best of luck on your exam.